What is nature? Hi, welcome to this podcast. My name is Deborah Avila.
And my name is Olivia Chavez.
And today we're going to be focusing on Deborah Miranda's poem Ancestors. So just to give a few background info about her, we want to share that she's an accomplished writer, a poet, professor of English. She was born in 1961, October 22, in Los Angeles, California, and currently she works at Washington and Lee University in Lexington, Virginia, working in the position of Thomas H. Brodus Jr., Professor of English.
Aside from that, the tribe that Miranda originates from is the Lonely Costanoan Island Nation. Following that, most of her works are centered around poetry books. They center around themes of identity, culture, nature, and as an Indigenous writer, she does work to advocate and empower Indigenous voices. She also has themes that center around and touch on the natural world, gender, motherhood, and resilience in a violent world. Specifically for the ancestor poem, it is in the Raised by Humans poetry book. The ancestor poem in that is it's the starting poem for the poetry book, and that poetry book really centers on surviving colonization and surviving childhood.
Also going on, I would say that Miranda's writing is very well celebrated. She has won numerous awards, including the Penn Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Award, and gold medal from the Independent Publishers Association. So clearly her work has been appreciated and her work needs to be mentioned. So that's why today we'll be talking about her work in this podcast. So Olivia, what's your identity with nature?
So my identity with nature, well, I would more say as my experience and interactions with nature. I think my interactions are definitely limited. And I think it really has to do with like the location where I grew up and where I live now. Ever since I was little, I lived in the same home, and where I am located, like I'm really surrounded by a lot of freeways, a lot of car movement, a lot of we live by railroad tracks, so there's a train constantly going through and by my house. So there was never really like a place near us that we can go out and walk, safely, where we can go and really not worry about incoming traffic and so on. So growing up, my connection with nature was never really created, and I never really thought as nature as I understood like the concepts of it, and I always saw it like outside of me, because where I lived, it was always outside of the perimeters where I lived. So that's how I ended up growing and seeing nature as, and I started to see it as a luxury, because people who can access these locations, like they either live very close to it and they have the luxury of being able to be away from dense areas with dense areas of pollution and traffic. So as I was growing older, like my family would be rare trips, but we would go up to the San Bernardino National Forest, and I, along with my family, like we really enjoyed these trips because we would walk around, get off the car, walk around with like mess with like the dirt, mess with the rocks. There was this like little waterfall in this area called Forest Falls, and we would really just stand there and take in the smells of the soil, the smells of the water, of the trees, the branches. It was really a time for us to like really hit reset. So I think from these rare and short trips, I slowly started to understand the importance of having nature and what it meant to me as a person, and like the connection that I think we need as humans to really carry this connection with nature and visit and be in these spaces. And I think as I'm growing, like I do say that I'm not well versed in nature. Like I think that I still to right now I have limitations, and I think as individuals, I think we have a duty to really like learn about our natural world and how it's really how the natural world, how we rely on it and not the other way around. So what about you, Deborah? What's your identity or connection to the natural world?
Yeah, so I definitely agree. I feel like there's a need to be in close relationship with nature, but it's not the reality for most people. And I think in that, I feel like it goes in with the narrative that nature is not, it's just like a thing. It's not really a thing that's embedded in our lives. Like we think as nature to be separate. And I definitely relate to that statement. I feel like growing up, I didn't take nature to be seriously. I just thought, it's there. You play and dirt, you make like little games in nature, and you get like messy in nature, and then you don't want to be around nature as you grow up because you think it's like dirty. Like once you get your hands in dirt, it's like, ew, let me go wash my hands, like don't touch me, blah blah blah. Like, so we kind of think sometimes, like, or at least for me, it's like nature is yucky, nature is nasty. And I feel like I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that because it shouldn't be that reality.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I feel like it all serves back to the disconnection that we have with nature, because growing up I lived my whole life in a lower income community, so there's not really much reach to nature. Even though in reality there is, like, you could go outside, you could see trees and grass, but it's not the same as you said, like the forest. I really divest or like have fun in just going to the beach, but that's not something I do a lot. Like I probably go to the beach once or twice a year, but when I do feel that connection to nature and the necessity that it is to be close with nature and to just like even hear the sounds of the waves. It brings such peace and such like nurture. If it's like my mom, I'm just kidding.
No, yeah.
But also, like, going back to the lower income community thing, like, I don't know, there's such a disconnection. There's not much connection to nature, as there's a lot of factories being built. Like, the whole community as a whole really, it's not really given the choice. And so I don't blame for this disconnection because I myself have it.
Our perceptions of the natural world really influence how we viewed and read this poem, because our interpretations aren't always going to be the same. So like for even like the word itself, like ancestors and what that means, to me, like the title connotes like something that like you're descended from a person and you're not descended from like the environment. In the poem, it really pushes that new idea of what a descendant is, what a descendant looks like. It really challenges our long time cemented belief that a descendant is a person. And Miranda really presents an important idea and concept here that you are also descended from water. Like, we were born from water. We were born and we continue to rely on water to survive, to be hydrated. Like, what would we do if there's no water? And so I think like that poem, like my viewpoint and understanding of that word alone, it reflects human error and not realizing the role that nature has in our beginnings as people and its involvement as we grow. Because we need water to grow, we need plants to grow, we need all these things, but we don't take it into account when we think of our beginnings.
Yeah, most definitely. And also ties back to the hundreds of narratives that there is surrounding nature. I know there's one during the Industrial Revolution with such high amount of inventions going around.
So I know like when like the first machines, really like the steam engine started to be built, and things like that, like those technical aspects of like the Industrial Revolution, I know that really pushed away from mainly this was like a European like culture. Like, it really pushed away from English agriculture and pushed it into this method of a mechanized agricultural method of production. So since then, and then even coming into like over to the United States, it really just like these changes in the mechanical world, it just kind of separated the human idea of raising your own animals and producing your own meats and things like that. Like that became mechanized. So from early on, humans removed themselves of the production of food, the raising of cattle. So it's been a long idea in the making.
Yeah, 100%. And also kind of ties in with the realms of colonization and how it affected nature. Thinking about like the Western, especially in modern times, the Western viewpoint towards nature, we kind of see nature as a means of production, just another thing that we can extract in order to make more capital. Definitely in ties with the system of capitalism.
Even like talking about like colonization, like when the colonists arrived and they saw the landscape here in the Americas, many had the viewpoint and ideas that this land was untouched, and this land looked the way it did because like it just did, when in reality that was the indigenous form of farming. That was their form of agriculture, which was maintaining these landscapes to appear as if they were untouched. That was their form of farming. And so it's known like the indigenous community and people during the time era, like they placed the natural world above them, and just the reciprocal relationship. If they take care of the environment and the land was going to take care of them. And I think that's such a big concept that has been lost across colonization, and it continues to be lost in the way that we now we now think of the world, and we now act towards the natural world. Now it's like, unfortunately, like the natural world is seen as a luxury, and places are losing because of buildings and construction. Like it's these landscapes, they're just shrinking and shrinking.
Yep, definitely. I feel like it's all in the idea of materialization and putting aesthetic into everything, and kind of making even nature like a victim of aesthetic. And so it kind of opens up to there's hundreds of narratives regarding nature, and as you said, some people care about it, some people don't. Even myself, like I question my identity with nature. Like, yes, I care for nature, but do I really care for nature?
Yeah.
Like it's all in the
and I think it's like, well, we want to say that we care for nature, and we want to say, but like, do we lecture ourselves on what it is and what exactly, how to help it, how not to, like what not to do? Like, do we really take the time out of our day to learn about what's around us and what goes into our bodies? Because we obviously don't care about the stuff that we're putting out, and everything that we put out, it's going back into us. And I think it just goes back to as I mentioned earlier, like the error in our ways and our negative relationship. And I say negative reciprocal relationship, not because of, the natural world giving something negative back to us. No, it's a negative reciprocal relationship because what we put out is what we get.
Yeah, 100%. And diving into our thesis, because I guess we have said a lot about the narratives, and it's very important to touch on like the ideas of nature and how people think about it. But now delving more into the poem and what we're going to be arguing about in this podcast. She says that nature is important. She discusses the interconnection that the natural element of water has with humanity, and she expresses the long-rooted connection across the eternal interactions between humans and water. And then she does so by the inclusion of elements that are properties in both ancestors serves to remind humanity of their roots in the natural world. So in this podcast, we're going to be arguing that humanity has a negative relationship with nature due to our lack of understanding the needs of our environment. Now, thinking about why there's a negative relationship between the two, why is there a negative reciprocal relationship? So upon doing further research, we found that microplastics is a huge issue in the oceans. Plastic pollution creates several kinds of negative consequences, including toxicological effects via ingestion of plastic, suffocation, starvation.
So now we're going to go ahead and give Deborah Miranda's Ancestors poem a closer look. We are using her poem in order to understand the level of seriousness and the level of deep connections that humanity has with this particular element, water. Argument really centers around that humanity has a negative relationship with the natural world. So I think the poem Ancestors works in letting us know and realize the responsibility that we have. We also have a secondary source that hits on the poor conditions that our oceans are currently in due to our behavior. So we're going to go ahead and begin and talk about a few things and in this poem to highlight the importance of our roles as humans.
So in Miranda, she very clearly repeats the word we about 16 times. She does not do this in such a hidden manner. She's very obvious in doing this. She writes, "We belong to the sea, etc. We are salt water walking on the land in soft containers called flesh. We welcome the fat drops." So clearly she is not saying that nature and humans are singular parts. They are interconnected. They affect one another and how they live. So in thinking about that, humans and nature, they cannot coexist without affecting one another. And thinking back to our thesis about how there's a negative reciprocal relationship between the two, thinking about how we treat nature, if we treat nature badly, it is gonna come back to us 10 times worse. Industrial revolution, we have polluted the earth with carbon monoxide, and in reciprocal manners, nature is suffering, and in suffering it affects humans as well.
In connection with what she says in the ancestor poem, it states, "Walking on two legs far away from the birthing waters, we travel wide plains, rest a while beside icy streams, make shelters out of snow." And this portion, Miranda really talks about water as being as a tool for survival. And she kind of hits on the viewpoint of humans seeing this as an amenity rather than, while at the same time really showing that water has been a necessity for humans. We drink water, we make shelter out of water. So really that idea is really reinforced in this portion right here. And I think it connects back to our thesis too. It shows that we have this negative relationship, and our treatment of the planet will be reciprocated back to us, because we will always gravitate back to water because it's something we need to survive.
Moving on to our second source, we did find some actual evidence conveying the idea that pollution obviously affects Earth. It states that accordingly, plastic pollution creates several kinds of negative consequences combined with ecological and socioeconomic effects. So for instance, there's entanglement, toxicological effects via ingestion of plastic, suffocation, starvation. So clearly, when we think of we and how Miranda applies nature and the relationship between nature and humans to be reciprocal, there's a clear negative relationship, because when you're polluting the earth, you selfishly think that it's not a given effect. However, the second source allows us to think that there is a reciprocal relationship, especially a negative one. Although we're also polluting the earth itself is polluting back to us, because it's harboring us in suffocation and plastics, which is obviously not a safe thing for humans and humans' life.
Yeah. And this is a problem. Like plastic pollution in our oceans is a problem that we created, and that we continue to do so across tourism. We do it across from, the coastal lines are very heavily concentrated with people and waste that goes into these to what is it called? There's a specific word for it, but any waste that comes out as a product, it gets dumped into our oceans. I was reading in the same article that any plastics that pile up in freshwater systems or rivers and streams, like that eventually gets flushed out into the ocean itself. And, it does touch on a solution. It specifically had stated the R's, it's reduce, recycle, and reuse. And it talks about how we as humans, like, we can really help change the direction and help plastic pollutants to start really start lowering down those plastic pollutants. And by doing so, that's why they mentioned the 3 R's, the reduce, recycle, reuse. It really talks about how humanity has to become aware of themselves and, ensure the cleanliness of our waters, because these waters hold ecosystems that in turn sustain us. If we don't sustain these oceans, like, we are losing our food sources.
Yeah, exactly. And also going back to the fishing industry, I feel like it's one of the biggest industries that kind of takes advantage of nature. And although we benefit from so many nutrients that we receive from marine life, like omega-3 is a big vitamin that we receive from eating fish, and it's honestly essential. Like, we basically survive with vitamins that arise from nature. However, also in the secondary source, it was saying that 49% of hook and line lobster traps were responsible for tissue damage, injuries, and death of sessile organisms. So we have the fishing industry that clearly abuses a lot of marine life, and in doing so, we think, there's millions of fish out there, like, it's never gonna end, there's gonna be more fish out there. But in reality, is there gonna be more fish out there? No, there's not gonna be more fish out there. More are gonna die in tissue damage and injuries before we realize that there's definitely the existence of a negative reciprocal relationship in how we treat nature's marine life.
And marine life has turned into farming. There are now farming farms of fish. So, even like the concept of eating and capturing fish has changed tremendously. And, going back to the point that you made about like the vitamins I receive, Deborah Miranda makes a point about these vitamins in her poem. She states magnesium, calcium, and potassium. These are all vitamins that we need to sustain our bodies. And, if you have more or less of one thing, it's going to dramatically affect you. Not only does she mention these 3 elements, but she also mentions chloride, sodium, sulfate. And these 3 elements are also found in seawater, salt lakes, it's alkaline mineral springs. These are all essential elements that are found in our waters, but are also found in our bodies. And she doesn't stop there. She also mentions copper, cobalt, hydrogen, oxygen, iron, bicarbonate, bromide, and strontium. And these are all elements that, are in our bodies, but that are also in this natural element. It's also in water. So I think by having this connection and correlation of, presenting these elements, even as readers, we kind of had to take a minute and really think about, why does she include these elements? And she does so in order to really demonstrate the level of interconnectedness that exists between humans and the natural world. I think that she gets really technical, and she uses this terminology. Like, most of these elements are found on the periodic table. And I also think that she does this. She gets very technical to provide, like, this is her evidence. Like, humans have that tendency to say, okay, like, but how are we connected? And she really uses scientific language in order to prove her own statement.
Going back to Miranda's poem, she uses her in order to humanize or personify nature in itself. Specifically, when she says after belong to the sea, she says, we bear her dark green wishes and slippery strands of thought. And in another one, she says she makes her claim on us in the end. So I feel like often our relationship to nature is very superficial. Like, we don't think twice about how we live in nature, how we breathe in nature. So in using her and these personifying pronouns, she recognizes and reminds readers to really think about that relationship. As much as we want to say that nature is not alive and we don't know it, we do. The pronouns, she kind of allows us to think nature to be more as a friend rather than a stranger. It's a friend that we have known for years, that we trust with our deepest secrets.
I think like that phrase too, going back, we belong to the sea. We belong to the sea. We go home, like the last phrase, like we go home. It's like we were born from water, and I feel like we don't realize, like, we go home. Our home is this world. Our home are these waters. These waters sustain us. And going back to the elements again, circling back to the elements, these are all things that all properties that we carry in our bodies. And I was telling Deborah that these is properties that we carry, like we inherit them from our ancestors. And here, these properties come from water. So it goes to show again that water is our ancestor. Water is element that we descend from. And I think Miranda does this in order to make the comparison of motherhood, and in order to make the comparison, like anything that you inherit from your mother, you're going to carry with you too. And that's why I think that she also personifies the sea by giving her the her pronoun, by referring to the water as her, because this is your mother. And I feel like she kind of makes that point where it's like you wouldn't want to, it's kind of like what my partner was saying, like you wouldn't want to hurt your mother, because by hurting your mother, like it hurts you. And the water here, it's like it's seen as a, like, as we like talked about in our like the secondary source that we provided, if we hurt Mother Nature and the sea, what are we gonna get back? We're gonna get the same thing back. And it's like our form of like nourishment is gonna go away, and our main thing of survival, are the main things that we need for surviving and eating and maintaining our health, like that's gonna diminish if we don't recognize the errors of our actions.